Right, this is me. You can find out more a bit about me on my website. Yesterday, as I was coming down the train and putting together this presentation, I present on badges a lot, but not usually in 5 minutes. Paul Graham, who is revered in Silicon Valley, you just need to go to his website to find out more about him. He kind of is behind different startups, and he's kind of, his words are listened to, has written lots of fantastic essays. He said, this was yesterday, even now few grasp the credentials were never more than a bad proxy for ability. And he links to this New York Times article. And this New York Times article is about a guy called Sean Bridges. And Sean Bridges, this is the kind of article that I've seen many, many times over the last 6 or 7 years. And usually they mention credentials or new types of credentials as being a way out of the trap that he's in. The trap that he's in is that where he lives, all the middle class jobs are going. Yeah, they're all just disappearing. So this particular one, I'll not read from the screen, this particular article in the New York Times talks about elevating skills over pedigree creates new pathways to employment and tailored training and a gateway to the middle class. Right? So that's this guy who used to live with his mother, and now, because IBM saw that he was fixing computers and stuff, he could prove what he did, and now he's got a job which is earning $45,000 a year. That article doesn't mention badges or doesn't mention digital credentials, which is what I've spent the last kind of 6 years of my life jumping up and down about. This guy, Michael Feldstein, who some of you might be aware of, he's recently redesigned his website so it looks slightly different. But he wrote a post about how digital badges are really gaining traction in a particular area in the US. And all of my examples are going to be in the US, mainly because that's where the funding around digital badges and credentials have been. So I want to take 2 quotes out of his article around digital badges that are gaining traction. The first one is this one about career readiness. And he cites Burning Glass, which is a company that some of you might have come across around looking at the skills that people need in particular areas. And he notes that some career paths have formal certifications, and the Burning Glass that tracks job skill requirements have found the career paths that lack certification tend to see the kind of degree inflation that Sam was talking about this morning over time. So I often talk about the reason I've got more credentials is because it's like an arms race. So why have I got a doctorate? Because loads of my friends had masters, and my dad had a masters, and I need to go one better. It's like an arms race, and it's like proliferation, and we can do better than that. So he says, well, jobs resist credential inflation when there are good alternatives for identifying skill proficiency. So at the moment, the real sweet spot for open badges, and the thing I'm going to talk about and get onto in a moment, is identifying skill proficiency and filling in a gap in the market where in the US a high school diploma isn't quite enough, but a degree is too much. And that's the reason why everybody wants a bachelor's degree, even though it's a ridiculous requirement to have. It's this credential inflation. So these images that I'm going to use now are from my good friend Brian Mathers, who's part of the cooperative that I work with. He is a computer scientist by training, but now kind of draws for a living, which is great because I get to use his imagery. And I think quite a lot of the time, as a former teacher, I think that we start off with something worth learning and we go through this to the credential, whereas what we usually actually do in practice, unfortunately, is start with the credential and somehow work backwards. And what I like about open badges is it allows us to do things the right way round and not to fill in gaps and do really interesting things. So when I'm talking about digital credentials, I'm not talking about replacing stuff, because with digital technology, it's always yes and. And so let's take the credentials that lots of us in the room have graduate and postgraduate degrees. Let's take those, let's fill them in as well. Let's put those little small pebbles in the jar to round out in a more holistic way who we are and what we can do. So what is an open badge? Well, an open badge is it's a digital credential based on a metadata specification. So in the same way that we have web browsers that can access any website, unlike the early days where you had to choose Microsoft Internet Explorer or Netscape Navigator, the reason you can go to any website and or build any website or web-friendly browser is because of open standards, and open badges is a standard which you can build on. So it's got all this information in. The thing that excites me is you can add evidence in there. You can actually evidence what it is that you did. And it's got all these kinds of things in, and version 2 of the specification is just being launched, which allows you to do even more, but I haven't got time to go into that today. So the reason I get excited about this, and the reason I ended up leaving JISC and going to work for Mozilla, who was stewarding this at the time, is because of the evidence base to it. It's not just, I can build a wall or I can do public speaking. There's actually evidence of you doing that thing. They're stackable around lifelong learning in a way that we've talked about for decades, but we've never been able to do. So the credentials you earn at school are on the same kind of trajectory as the things you're doing when you're towards the end of your career. It's a free and open standard, which means it's not siloed. You know, we talked about Pearson early. Pearson can't come and just try and grab the whole landscape or any, you know, insert evil company here. Transferable as well, so it's not like somebody owns your credentials. You own your credentials and you can move them about as you see fit. You can take them from college to your job, you can display them anywhere you want on the web. And for me, like I said before, it's these small pebbles in the jar. It allows you to put fine detail on the very broad brushstrokes that formal education gives you. So I'm guessing most people in the room have a LinkedIn profile. LinkedIn profile essentially is your job history and your academic qualifications. Whereas if you start adding more detail in there, it has a much more holistic picture of who you are, which leads to something like this, a much more three-dimensional CV or resume, where you can put some of the soft skills we were talking about this morning. You can put things like teamwork and empathy and resilience, and all of a sudden this person springs out of the page or the screen to you. It's much more three-dimensional. It's not just this static person that's a bit sketchy. You can't really figure out how they're different from the other A-star candidates. So for me, this is like the difference between a university or college prospectus, which says if you come here, you will learn these things. It's, you know, being progressively funneled through a series of courses, versus some kind of autobiography where you have this descriptive pathway of what you actually did, following your interests and talents and attributes. And to kind of cite a Coldplay song, this leads to a sky full of stars, where you have effectively stars being represented by badges, and the way that you decide to connect these up, these pathways, some of them have been traversed before, and therefore are valid, reliable, interesting pathways that people should follow. But also there's pathways that nobody has traversed yet, which you can make on the fly, which other people after you might then want to traverse themselves. So that's Open Badges in a nutshell. There's much, much more to tell you about it, but have a look at openbadges.org or just grab me afterwards. All these images come from Brian at visualthinkery.com.